So first thing I want to say is I feel like I should apologise because there really is nothing remarkable about my life. I hope it's okay to share that straight away and just let you know that I feel like I've sort of given you all a bit of a dud steer and invited you along, but some of the guys are ready to leave already. But you know what? I reckon there is something remarkable about what God does in the lives of people who love Him. And I reckon there's probably a lot more interesting stories in this room that I'd love to hear one day. Mine sort of begins with I've got about quarter of an hour, I reckon, maybe 20 minutes. So I'm just going to give this a go and see what happens. If there's something that I've really missed, my phone's here. You can text me, and I may be able to cover it. So I grew up in a house with my parents love the Lord. I'm the oldest of three, so my sister Rhonda is in Perth with her other half at the moment, and a couple of kids. My brother Dave is 7 years below me, and he's in Brisbane with his wife Chelsea and a couple of kids. My parents still live up on the Sunshine Coast. They divorced probably 20-something years ago, just as about Amanda and I were getting married, actually. We grew up in a place called I grew up in a place called Toowoomba, at least, which is about 2 hours from Brisbane, 2 hours west of Brisbane. I have distinct memories of being in this little church of about 40 people in this little hall, and I committed the cardinal sin of pinching the communion bread after they'd tossed it out on Sunday morning. I still remember that going on. I think I remember. I think I started following Jesus when I was in about grade 8 or 9. I think that was the moment where I realised that what Jesus had done was not just for the rest of the world and for everybody, but it was for me. And it was just a day where it somehow sort of made sense. And I knew that, but I honestly doubted whether I've got a couple of options. One is I doubted whether God cared enough about me to really notice. I wondered whether He could really be bothered having a plan that I could fulfill. And C, I thought surely His plan was for people who are more talented or special than I was, because I'm pretty normal. As a teenager, we were always active in church. I did sound, which is why when Amanda came along, I loved doing sound and just watching her. But after a while, I got sick and tired of watching her. I wanted to come and hang out on stage with her, and that's still a work in progress. And I'm really not that smart. If you are familiar with the OP system, the 1 to 25 thing, let's just say that there's 18 numbers between my wife's and mine. So I'll leave that there and you can figure it out from there. But I finished school and had probably no idea really what I wanted to do. And I spent a couple of years pushing trolleys and being a checkout chick and working at Coles and helping with a whole heap of things. Weekends were spent hanging out with friends at church, playing sport, chasing girls, going to the beach and all that sort of stuff. All the stuff that you do. I had this incredible dream to go into the police force, but I knew it would take probably a miracle to actually get there, and a lot of hard work. And one day my dad's pretty quiet. He's pretty reserved. He's not a leader of in any sense of the word, but he's a great guy. And he told me one day in one of his moments of wisdom something like. You know that if you never try this, in 20 years' time, we'll be sitting down fishing one day and we'll regret it. I said, "You're right." And a couple of weeks later, I started studying, and the rest, I guess, is history. So midway through studying, I think I was about 20 years of age, I think, and I went to a party one night for a friend of mine from my church. And there was this amazing woman in a red dress, and we swapped phone numbers on paper plates, which is what you do after you have dessert and all that sort of stuff. And the rest is history. pretty much how that worked out. And young people, it really is different when you meet the one, because there was a moment, I reckon, a couple of months in where you just realise you can't stand the idea of being apart. You just can't. You had to sort of give her away and leave, and it just didn't feel right. And about I guess under 2 years after that, we were engaged, and I actually applied for the police the first time and got in, and I couldn't believe it. So the academy was 26 weeks, 27, 28 weeks, I think, and it was a stretch. It was a long stretch, but we made it. We got married the weekend before I finished at the academy. So pretty much we got sworn in on the Thursday. We had a couple of nights to ourselves and then started work. And I think we're sort of still catching up on the honeymoon, I think probably 20 years later. I spent the first 4 years were in uniform in Brisbane. Amanda was at uni, and so I spent 4 years in uniform, which was plenty of fun, but also it's also boring because you're on the counter as a young guy, and it's like, oh, come on, there's a whole world out there to save, and I've got to do it, right? I really wanted to go into plain clothes, which is where the interesting stuff happened, and that's where I ended up after 4 years. I went into state crime operations, which is like a specialist area based at headquarters, and spent 18 months in the fraud squad, 18 months taking apart drug labs, which was good fun, travelling all over the state. A couple of months in child abuse, which is a real challenge when you got a little bubby at home at the time. That's a really interesting thing. And then back out to Fortitude Valley. Now, Fortitude Valley was the fun. It was the entertainment precinct, and always stuff happening, and a great bunch of people to work with. Many of them got promoted and are now doing awesome things. And I watch the news for Queensland once in a while, and you're like, hey, I remember him. I worked with him. I did all that sort of stuff. So we had a couple of murders in quick succession from about 2008 to 2011. I'm going to say. And I guess I share that not because there's anything special about it, but simply because that when the pressure is on all the time to get them solved, the pressure's on all the time. You got this massive amount of things to be done, and this massive amount of challenges to fill, and you can't stand the idea that anybody else will get credit for it or put credit for it apart from you. So you just keep going and going and going. I guess the thing that you work for was to get told by a list of very high-ranking and influential people what a good job you did. Now, I fully, all that work takes commitment, it takes time and everything else, and I fully get, I guess, when you get told that by people who matter, it's intoxicating. It really is. So I completely get what coppers these days work for, because it is more than a job. So like for many of the guys, I get the work thing for guys because it really is more than a job in a lot of ways. But at the same time, the weekends were sort of to try to sort of invest in your marriage a little bit, play with the kids a little bit, turn up a little bit, be present for church a little bit. And just sort of keeping up appearances. So even though I was having great success at work, things, I guess, were starting to struggle a little bit. And I wasn't being the husband I should have been, or the father I should have been, and probably not the Christian either. So I always knew that God probably wanted more, but I wasn't ready to give him more. And that's probably how I lived for a good portion of time. And I wish I was able to actually make sense of the balance needed to work a really challenging job and be the dad at home. I could never do it. I really struggled doing that. And let's just say that I'm very fortunate to be married to the world's most patient and long-suffering wife that is possible, and also the most forgiving one. After about 10 or 11 years in Brisbane, we were married with 2 kids. We decided to take a transfer to Biloela, which is in central Queensland, little community of about 6,000 or 7,000 people. And the reason for that was we were pretty much just sick of the pace of life and the commute. You're working, sort of 6:30 to 6 most days. You're never at home. You know how this is going, and I thought maybe in the bigger picture this would be like a change of pace, and work would relax a little bit, and it'd look good later on for a promotion and all that sort of stuff. Instead, what happened was the next 12 months was probably the darkest period in our life in many respects. My work was miserable. Had a couple of co-workers that I really didn't get along with, which was really strange for me. There were complaints. There were also other issues for Amanda and I personally that we dealt with, and I guess the facade that I had built about this is who I am was starting to crumble a little bit. And it was the first time, I think in about 35 odd years, that I actually went to God one day and started out asking him, who is it really that you've created me to be? I remember a day where I had a day off, and I wrote down my name on a bit of paper and sort of just was hoping to sort of add some other things to it. By the end of the day, I still had a blank bit of paper in front of me. And I was really just sort of going, there's got to be more than this. And when you have a long held a high but a mistaken idea that of yourself, a mistaken opinion of your own value, it takes some time for that to break down. Let's just say that it's very humbling to realise that in the grand scheme of things, I'm not really that important. John 3:30 is in the bottom of my AGM report. He must become more and more. I must become less and less. That's a hard lesson to learn. I've read somewhere that God can't use a man until he's hurt him deeply. And I can fully tell you that is absolutely true. Amongst all the turmoil, Billo was great for us. We had a ball, and we had a church family that loved us. And a few years later, we had Ryan, which was a whole different kettle of fish. And we also had a bunch of unsaved friends. I love being around non-Christians. All of a sudden, you start seeing. We actually had this day where we got Ryan dedicated at church. And I walked in, sat next to my friend who's not a Christian, who's never been to church before in his life. And everything that's happening in the church, I'm like, oh dear. It changed my perspective completely on the church. So if I have a different opinion about church sometimes, it still is remarkable how much that one event, walking in with the non-Christian guys, specifically the first day, thinking, what is he? Oh no, we really said that. We really sang that. We really, oh brother, So anyway, that's another conversation for another day. So a couple of years in, I ended up on the church board. Was asked to preach a couple of times. Let's just say that the country churches are very forgiving. That's true here as well, by the way. And I found out that preaching is actually a little bit like being a detective. It's actually like trying to make sense of a really complicated mess of something and figure it out. The police gives you a great bunch of stories and experiences and a very unique perspective on life, but it also, you're surrounded by people dying all the time. You're surrounded by things going wrong all the time. You're surrounded by people bereft of hope all the time. And it really began to dawn on me that Jesus really is the answer to a world that's lost. He really is. The decision to leave the police was a very long and difficult one. It was not one that was made overnight. There was some years involved in that. It started seriously one day after a long period of uncertainty with a call from a mate of mine who was an ex-copper, and he was working for the Church of Christ. They wanted community chaplains. They wanted people who were street smart but Christian at the same time. And so similar, like the same clientele that the police are used to, but you can't arrest them anymore, or taser them anymore, and that sort of stuff. So I missed out because I hadn't done any study, and that annoyed me, I guess. And after a while, I'm like, you know what? The more I think about this, the more this is something I want to do. And it took a long time for it to figure itself out. But in about 2015, we took a bit of a step of faith, and I started studying, thinking it'd be a short-term thing, and it ended up being a long-term thing. The other big thing, I think, probably just to let you know in on, was the toll of shift work takes its toll. 15 years of shift work, and in the country in central Queensland, the shifts are not forgiving. In a small town where there's about 10 coppers and a town of 7,000, and you're closed for 8 hours of the day, depending on what it is, you're on call all the time, and it was nothing to get three call-outs during the night. And if you're like finishing at midnight and starting again at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you get 3 call-outs where you've got to go to work at 3 different times in that 10 hours and then function the next day from 10 to 6, that's a recipe for disaster. And it takes its toll after a while. There are still some days that I wish I hadn't left. Just to let you know. And you know, I don't miss the work, but I do miss the people I worked with. And I miss the people I work with because I actually miss the situation, like hanging out, like going to a somebody that died, and you talk to, you know, the family, and you talk to your partner, and you spend the rest of the day debriefing what's happening in a real world scenario, and then having a beer at the station at the end of the day, trying to make sense of this with somebody. And I know why it makes sense, and my partner didn't. And just I really miss those conversations. I really miss that. And the funny thing is, the one thing I told God that I wouldn't be is a pastor. Don't ever tell God what you won't do for him. And I didn't want to not be a pastor because it sucked or anything else. I wanted to not be a pastor because I'd grown up in a church where there was this nice church world that was so safe and nice over here, and there's all these nice people and nothing ever goes wrong, and they're so inward focused, and a lot of Christians who live for Sundays, and that's the end of the discussion. And it never actually gets lived out. And it drove me nuts because the police was a world where it was dangerous and it was on edge, but people were broken and they needed Jesus. And I guess I seriously could not think of anything worse than hanging out with church people all the time. Is it okay to be honest? Okay, good. It's too late. That's exactly right. The funny thing was that I had to spend some time doing study when I was in the police. When I was studying, you had to do some time in ministry, doing the odd sermon here and there, and a bit of pastoral care, and trying to lead some small groups. And the funny thing is, I actually really enjoyed it. I had some friends of mine and my wife saying that pastoring was more and more where I should go, and I fought it. And the funny thing is, I still fight it. Just to be honest about it. One day, I was hanging out with God trying to get a sense about what I should do. And we read 2 Timothy 4, which says, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young. Be an example to the believers in what you say, the way you live, your love, your faith, your purity. That was a verse that had changed our life as a youth group, and had been one of those things that we really sort of chased after as young people in the church. I never noticed the verse after it. There was one day where I was really searching God, going, what is it you want me to do? The next verse says, until I get back, read the scriptures to the church, encourage the believers, teach them. Do not neglect the gift you've been given. And I remember it hitting me like a ton of bricks. And I know that I'm a pastor. I know that I get called Pastor Steve, and I really don't feel it some days. I really, really don't. But I've learnt that with God, so much of life is I'll go where you send me, when you send me, regardless of how or whether I like it or not. And I'll leave the rest to you. We spent almost 4 years in a church that we loved in Brisbane. And it was difficult for us to leave the last church, because after a lot of years of being in churches that didn't do a lot of stuff or have a lot of life, this one, let's just say we wanted to stay. A lot of things came together for us, and life would have been so much easier for the family to have stayed. But like usual, it appears that God always has other plans. So last year I was invited to apply for this, and there was also a job as a police chaplain in Western Australia. And let's just, I'll be honest. You know which job I would have preferred. That's simply because of who I am. That is not a reflection on the church, okay? It isn't. It's just, and I guess that's the fight sometimes with God. You leave yourself at the door, and you trust Him. That's what I've learned. And the journey of walking with God and just holding on to the idea that He knows what He's doing. That's something that takes a lifetime to master. I want to just touch on one thing about my journey moving forward. I am here in many respects because of the role of other people in my life. I'm not a youth pastor, by the way. I'm really excited about us moving forward as a church into that sort of space. But I want to tell you that the reason I'm here is because, in many respects, the faithful guidance and love from a couple of pretty significant people. My dad was great, but he wasn't the spiritual leader of our family. My grandfather was. He was a great man of God, and we hung out with him a lot. He would come wake me up as a teenager from my sleep. We'd read the Bible and pray. And that was annoying because I'm not a morning person, and after shift work it got even worse. But he always had some new insight about God. Every day he'd come up with something new, and it just seemed like it just bubbled out of him all the time, and day in and day out. And I'm like, it was never religious knowledge. It was life-changing stuff as well. My grandfather was a guy who, in his late 70s and early 80s, decided that our church wasn't doing enough for our young people, so he started a youth Bible study. In his 80s. I'm not going to put that out there for anybody else, but I still remember him at the table in his little unit with about 8 or 10 other youth, reading the Bible and talking to them about Jesus. And let's just say that if you think your time has gone, if you think the best of your life is over, my grandfather would tell you, as long as you've got breath in your lungs, you've got a job to do. That's very much the attitude that I have grown up with. I remember the faithful example and the joy that it brought him day in and day out. And what he represented for me was this faith thing actually can get lived out. Secondly, there was another guy who intentionally, I guess. So I was about 21. I had a lot of big decisions to make. I was dating a girl who was amazing, but I was in over my head. I was a boy having to make man-sized decisions, and I was applying for a job of a lifetime, and I was out of my league, and I knew it. And one night at our church, our men were having like a men's dinner at the local pub, which is awesome, by the way. I love that idea. They had this dinner at the pub, and Trev came up to me after and said, "Hey, what's going on? How you going?" And he was a guy that I had known for a while and trusted pretty well. He was about 25 years older than me, and I just felt like I remember being honest with him and saying, I just feel a bit lost and it's a struggle. And every fortnight for years after that, Trev and I would go Sunday morning brekkie at Macca's before church every fortnight and just talk about real life and talk about how God was there and pray and stuff. And the funny thing is that Trev wasn't qualified to do half the stuff he was doing. He was not qualified to, he left the church eldership because he'd been divorced. He left in a bit of under a bit of a cloud. He had to sell his business. He had to sell all these toys and everything else. He was a really successful guy, and so in the world's eyes, he was a bit of a failure. But he had two things going for him. He loved Jesus, and he was available to the people around him. The rest is history. I guess I haven't talked to him for 20 odd years, which is another story for another day. But we did talk last year. But I'm here in many respects because of the impact of a couple of good people, and I share that because I want to encourage you to make an impact. I preached this morning about community, and really what I wanted to say was, you never know the impact you have. You never know the difference you make. And if you're available, God can use you. There's we've got one paragraph to go. There's a great psalm in Psalm 136. You can go home and read it tonight. It's got about 23 odd verses or something like that, and it says something different, and then each verse ends with, "His faithful love endures forever." Give thanks to him who made the heavens so skillfully. His faithful love endures forever. Give thanks to him who brought Israel out of Egypt. His faithful love endures forever. Give thanks to him for whatever's next. His faithful love endures forever. And it just keeps going and going and going. I read that passage last year in the middle of making this decision about weighing up this job and lots of other things going on in my mind. And I guess that repeated little verse has become my testimony. If I had to summarise my testimony and my life in many respects, it would be that sentence. His faithful love really does endure forever. In the seasons of not knowing where he even had a plan for me, his faithful love endured forever. In the seasons of disappointment where things didn't go to plan and there seemed to be no hope, his faithful love endures forever. In the seasons of joy and solving murders and everything else, and being at the very heights of everything going on in your life, his faithful love endures forever. In the seasons of uncertainty when you don't know where to turn, his faithful love endures forever. And whatever season of life you are in today, his faithful love really does endure forever. It's taken a lot of learning to come to that point. That is not a place to come to lightly, but it's absolutely true. I'm not sure whether you are old, or whether you are young, or whether you are somewhere in between, or at the outer limits of that thing. But his faithful love does endure forever, and his faithful love is never gonna give up on you. That's my testimony. I have no idea what else to say after that, and I've gone a little bit longer than I'd hoped. I'm going to say there's no messages because it's actually gone a little bit later than I'd planned. But I just wanted to let you know that in the grand scheme of things, wherever you are and wherever you are in life, and whatever it means and whatever challenge that you are facing today, God will never let you down. He just doesn't let you down. If that's a word of encouragement to someone, I hope so. It's been fun actually just reading that again and remembering the difference that those words make. So thanks for letting me share it, and it's good to be doing it.